Hi, my friend Sam here. Today, what I want to talk about is the difference between tourniquets versus wraps, the two categories. I have a lot as happens over the years, and so let's run through some differences. All right, so for starters, tourniquets are aimed at arterial occlusion. Arterial occlusion, all right? That's it. That's their target. Their job is to constrict vessels until you stop bleeding. Wraps do that. Some of them do that, but they are also meant to do a lot of other things too. So I can apply them to my head, my knee, my ankle. Wraps have many uses. So I'm going to say arterial occlusion plus. The weight and size of tourniquets versus wraps. Tourniquets weigh a bit more. I'll give it a plus. Wraps weigh a little bit less. Slishman Pressure Wrap weighs 1.2 ounces, a little bit less than that as well. As far as materials go, tourniquets are typically inelastic. I'll say IE. Wraps, typically elastic. Now there are exceptions to this. The SWAT T is elastic. There's a Russian-made tourniquet that's also elastic, but the majority of the favorite tourniquets out there right now are inelastic webbing based. As far as rigidity goes, tourniquets have typically some component that's rigid. So it can be a ratchet system, it could be a long piece of metal or plastic windlass. I'm going to say more rigid. Wraps typically are pretty soft and not rigid. So I'll say soft. Now, there are exceptions there too. The Israeli has some bits of plastic in there. The Elias wrap has a bit of plastic. But if those pieces fail, the product doesn't fail. You can still use them. Adjustability. So tourniquets have discrete set points. See if I can spell this right. And wraps have indiscrete or fine adjustability. So, or you could say infinite adjustability. Tourniquets, so I made up a word here, tacticoolness. So tourniquets, without a doubt, win this category. Very, very, very tacticool. Wraps, less so. They are, you could say, tacti-meh. So anyway, as far as cost goes, tourniquets cost a little bit more. So $25 to $40 typically. I think the SWAT T may be in the 15 to 20 range, but for the majority of wraps, they cost less. As far as size goes, tourniquets are a little bit more bulky. If you have them in your pocket, you know they're there. Bigger in wraps. Slishman Pressure Wrap in particular, if I have them in my pocket, I notice my keys more than my wrap. So, minus. And then the intended application site for a tourniquet is proximal to the wound. For wraps, the intended site is over the wound. So this is all sort of the low-hanging fruit. What I really want to get to is a little bit more philosophical perspective on tourniquets versus wraps. So I'm going to draw a few different graphs here. One of them looks like this. Typical is my x-axis. Here's my y-axis. I'm going to define these axes now. So for my y-axis, it's milliliters per second. I could make this liters per second. I could make it drips per microsecond. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's a rate, and it's a rate of blood loss. On this is pressure. So how much pressure am I applying either proximal to a wound in the case of a tourniquet or over a wound in the case of a wrap? And let's put in one point here. We can say arterial occlusion. I could subdivide that into systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, but for the purpose of this visual, that's good enough. All right, let's talk about the scenario of the wrap first. And so for any given pressure, what happens to my rate of bleeding? And this is what my curve looks like. And I'm hoping that I get to this point here. After arterial occlusion, bleeding has stopped. And this is time t equals 0. Now, over time, what happens to these curves? So this is t equals 1 and 2. And our target, the goal with a wrap for bleeding control is to get to this curve right here, where it's flat. And that means there is no ongoing bleeding for any amount of pressure. And what that means also is I can take the wrap off. That's your target with bleeding control. You want to get to a point where you don't need a wrap and your patient is still breathing and alive. All right, so this is the scenario for wraps. I'm I'm going to erase this and do the same treatment with tourniquets. All right, so let's talk about tourniquets now. Same situation. I want to get, my goal is to get to arterial occlusion here. Now, I have milliliters per second bleeding. This curve is a little bit different looking, and I know this because of an experiment I did on my own arm. I had a arterial line and an IV. As I constricted and closed off venous return, I could see the pressures go up. And so the issue is this: if I don't get to this point quickly, I'm actually making people worse for a time. So this is what that curve looks like. I mean, it may look more like this, but bottom line is you have to get to arterial occlusion very quickly for your tourniquet to be doing its job. Now, at this point in here is when you have venous occlusion. So the bottom line is when you have venous occlusion, you have, you've stopped backflow towards your heart, and you have blood going out into the limb, and it can't get back, so it's going out through the hole. So that's no good. Now, over time, this curve is going to look more and more like this. And once again, your goal is to get to a point where it's flat. And that's the point when you don't need pressure on the limb anymore for bleeding control. And that's the point at which you can convert. But it's a little bit difficult to know what that point is. You have to, for conversion, you have to put direct pressure over your wound and then release. And mind you, when people talk about speed to apply tourniquets, it's interesting to me. I mean, they should be putting direct pressure on first, followed by tourniquet application, but that's typically not what you see. If you Google tourniquet application saves life, most people are not using direct pressure. All right, so now let's do a similar analysis, but thinking about pain and tissue damage. So let's let the y-axis be pain/tissue damage. Pain/damage. All right, so first we'll talk about the wrap scenario. I guess you could start out under it because if you have a wound, typically it feels a little bit better to put a little bit of something on it, like a Band-Aid. But in any case, this is what your graph looks like, and then it'll start to spike up once you get to arterial occlusion. When you have ischemia, it hurts. And over time, this is gonna keep going up like that. All right, so that keeps going up. Now, let's superimpose this with our other graph, the milliliters per second graph. All right. This goes down here like that. So what this means to me is that there is a sweet spot for pressure. You want to get to this point here, and this is sort of the acceptable level of pain. Anything above that pressure is unnecessary. Every millimeter of mercury higher than arterial occlusion is causing unnecessary pain and tissue damage. And so this is my sweet spot. And over time, this arterial occlusion number may actually be going down because you have ongoing bleeding or other problems. You can actually adjust this to the point where patients have less and less pain. That's, you know, the sweet spot over time might vary as you have clotting and vasospasm, maybe less blood in the body and less pressure. That sweet spot goes down. All right, now let's do the same thing, but thinking about tourniquets. With tourniquets, really there is no point at which you're not in pain. When people walk up to you and they say, I'm gonna put this tourniquet on, it's gonna hurt, they're right. And it's because no matter your pressure, there's pain involved. Even at the very beginning, if you look closely or if you practice with tourniquets, your skin gets sucked into these buckles and it hurts. So put the pain here, and then when you get to venous occlusion, that's more pain. And then once you get to arterial occlusion, it just shoots through the roof. So tourniquets are more painful. There's no doubt about it to me. And this worsens over time. All right? Here's the other bit. Now remember that previous curve that I had? It was like this, and you get down to arterial occlusion. So if I am using a product that has discrete set points, so this is the first set point. I have a cinch that gets me to here, not doing anything to help me. If I pull that cinch tight, I'm just getting out to here. Now I have a windlass and I have to turn 180 degrees. Maybe that gets me to here. I don't have arterial occlusion at this point. So if I have to do another 180 degree twist, that gets me way out here. And that's why tourniquet pain, in particular windlass tourniquet pain, is exquisite. You have to go way out to here to be sure that you don't have arterial occlusion. And you have no adjustability then. So, you're told, hey, keep this tourniquet on until you get to the hospital. Patients are miserable. In some cases, as they continue to bleed, as fluids shift away, then you lose arterial occlusion, and then you're in an even worse spot because you have a venous tourniquet. And I can tell you from personal experience that venous tourniquet pain is agony. So the bottom line with these graphs is tourniquet pain is worse, wrap pain is less, and you have more adjustability with wraps. So that is why I'm more of a fan of wraps for bleeding control. All right, so I'm gonna wrap this up. That is a pun. I'm gonna wrap this up with a little bit more discussion about personal risk assessment. And I live in my own little bubble of life, as we all do, and I see the world in my own little way, which is shaped by my own experiences. As far as tourniquets versus wraps go, the world that I live in here, wraps make much more sense. I am much more worried about my kids than I am about me. I want them to have something that they can use on themselves or their friends. If I hand their teachers a tourniquet, I am not necessarily trusting that they'll get it right. But if I give them a wrap, I think their teachers will do much more good than harm. So if I lived in a setting where I'm driving down the street and I'm worried that I might drive past an IED, my calculus might be a little bit different, and that's fair enough. Do your own risk assessments, figure out what type of place you are living in and what your own personal risks are, as well as what's the competence of the people who are around you, and get the products that make most sense for you. That's all. Be well, be safe, like and subscribe if you like. Have a good day.